Hi, I'm Jennifer Potter, Executive Director of Be Well Texas. Too many people are struggling alone these days, and alcohol and drug deaths are increasing. We started Be Well Texas to offer high-quality, science-based addiction treatment and recovery services anywhere, virtually or in person. In many cases, there is no cost for treatment or medications if you don't have insurance. Really. Welcome to Be Well Texas. We're glad you're here. Visit bewelltexas.org.
So, Roadrunner fans, welcome to episode 263 of the Alamo Audible Podcast, brought to you by the Dave Campbell's Texas Football Republic of Football Podcast Network. This is your host, Jared Kalmus, flying solo on a preview episode this week. Both Adrian and I have a lot going on in our personal lives this week, so it made it tough for us to find a time that we could both hop on together and preview the Mean Green. But of course, the show must go on, and thankfully, it's a team that I follow very closely that UTSA is playing this week, and I can talk at length about them. Probably no problem. We'll see how many minutes of recording I can pull off solo here. But of course, it's a huge rivalry game for UTSA. The Battle of the Birds. It's been a series that I was talking to JD, who covers North Texas. And I don't feel like many outside of this state have any idea of like kind of the history of this series. There's been some really, really great contests. These games tend to be not only evenly matched, but they tend to carry high stakes as well. I mean, even in seasons where neither team really has a whole lot to play for as far as, conference championship goes or anything like that, you still tend to see very spirited performances between two teams that tend to be pretty evenly matched on the talent standpoint. I mean, the roster just on both teams up and down is full of guys that both schools went after. You've got several guys that were commitment flips, or guys where their final two were UTSA and North Texas, right? So two programs that, man, it's just fun to see them butt heads, right? Because the victor tends to have more than just a win or a loss next to their name, right? It's something that carries momentum through the offseason with them as well. I think a lot of the investments these programs have made has caused the other program, to turn around and do the same as well. So and that's great to see. I think that really makes both programs better for that. And it's the beautiful thing about college sports. Rivalry used to drive so much of this and make this so much fun. But to talk a little bit more about the series itself, so UTSA has built out a 7-5 lead in this series. And I have to admit, I was a little bit surprised when I went on Wikipedia and saw that, UTSA had built that 2-game lead in the series, and also that they're on a 3-game winning streak against the Mean Green. One of those wins of the 3 being a conference championship game that the Roadrunners took over the Mean Green in 2022. And another thing that surprised me was this is Jeff Traylor's 5th time to coach against North Texas while he's been at UTSA. So it's pretty wild to think that, out of how long this series has been played, Coach Traylor has been there for at least a third, nearly half of the series. It's kind of crazy to think for sure. But yeah, enough about that. I mean, I think we'll see that tough competition carry forward once again this week. I think it's two teams that, if the Roadrunners win this one, they're going to have equal records this year, which if you would have said that, probably a month and a half or 2 months ago, that would have been shocking, right? Because I think the trajectories of the seasons have inverted a bit. North Texas started out really strong and, had a really nice start to their year, had some eye-popping performances. And, some of those wins didn't really age as well as you would have hoped if you're a Mean Green fan. I mean, like beating South Alabama at the beginning of the season seemed like a massive win for the Mean Green at the time. And, it turns out the Jags aren't that good this year. And then for UTSA, it's kind of been the inverse, right? Like really rough start to the season. They've not looked great in a lot of their showings. But, they're coming off a big win against Memphis. And, that offense has started to click, right? So I think it's probably premature to say that these two teams are on opposite trajectories right now. That might be doing a bit much. But it's clear that one team brings in a lot more positive momentum in this game than the other. So, and the main reason I say that is just because UNT is coming off a really brutal 3-game stretch. They, in the past 3 games, they've had an 8-point loss to Memphis, an 8-point loss to Tulane, and then an 11-point loss to Army last week. So that's really tough. One possession and, just slightly 2 possession losses to 3 of the best teams in this conference back to back to back. And now you have to travel to face your rival in a place that you have not had a lot of success historically playing in the Alamo Dome. I think UNT's only won once in the Alamo Dome, and your opponent, the Roadrunners, are actually coming off a bye week, right? So they went on, got the first, by the book, first top 25 victory in program history. They've played their way into bowl contention with that, and they had a bye week to rest up and get healthy. And it sounds like the injury report for UTSA is fairly positive. Coach Traylor was a little bit upbeat, talking about the injury report in his different media interviews that he's done this week. Sounds like some of those secondary players may be back, which is huge. Some of the receivers are coming along. So I'm curious to see what the injury report is going to look like for the Mean Green. Last week against Army was so tough. I don't think the score really indicates what that game looked like snap by snap. UNT lost 14-3, but Army just had a complete stranglehold. I mean, they really suffocated the life out of the Mean Green. Most people listening to this podcast may have seen, it went viral. Army had like a 21 play drive that went like 94 yards to score against UNT. UNT had they touched the ball like 3 times in the third quarter in that game or something like that. I say that just to emphasize the point that it's a very physical game that UNT is coming off of against Army, right? They took a lot of blows, a lot of body blows. And, it's not just the defense taking hits or giving hits, right? But also, the secondary players are having to tackle more often against UNT's triple option offense. And Army just plays so tough, man. Their defensive line was really active and really getting after it, bringing a lot of pressure on Chandler Morris. So, no doubt the team is going to be banged up, right? And whether or not they have guys missing and unavailable to play on Friday or not, I think it's just a really tough thing, physically to recover from playing a really tough Service Academy triple option team like Army is, and then to go on the road and go play in the Alamo Dome on limited rest. It's a really tough assignment for North Texas. So I think they've got the work cut out for them there. And that's a really tough draw, man. I mean, to have Memphis, Tulane, Army, UTSA in a 4-week stretch, that's as rough as it comes for sure. I mean, the schedule makers did Eric Morris no favors with that one for sure. But it's just a great matchup for sure. And start getting into, the offense for the Mean Green just a little bit here. So schematically, the Mean Green are every bit as much of an air raid team as you would expect from a head coach like Eric Morris, who played and thrived in an air raid offense when he was a player. And nothing to be surprised there. What you've seen for the Mean Green is what you're going to get this year. They're going to throw that ball around like it's nobody's business. The run game is kind of just there to keep the defense honest. They definitely fully intend to do the most of their damage through the air. But, outside of the schematics, I mean, my takeaway from this Mean Green offense this year is it's a great example of how a team's fortunes can change so quickly in the transfer portal. I mean, I think there's really 2 guys that you can circle that UNT picked up in the transfer portal this offseason that just completely elevated this offense, right? Those 2 guys are quarterback Chandler Morris and wide receiver DT Sheffield. Both guys Power 5 transfers. Chandler Morris, a lot of experience at TCU, coach's son, a guy that I thought that UTSA might get in on. I can't remember if they, were really in the mix with him or not. But man, just this guy's been a stud for North Texas this year for sure. He can make all the throws. He's got a lot of talent, and I'd say he does have to put a lot on his shoulders for this team, which kind of forces him into some unfavorable situations from time to time of just having to do too much probably. And that's why he has 10 interceptions on the year. But he's already just under 3,100 passing yards for the season, 64% completion rate, 26 touchdowns. He's a really, really good player, guys. Really good. Can throw on the run, super accurate on the run, and just a really, really smart player as well. But when you got a guy to throw to like DT Sheffield, it sure makes your life a hell of a lot easier. So DT's got a pretty interesting story. So he was at Washington State whenever Eric Morris was there as the OC. And, I think DT was not really getting into the rotation wide receiver. And he left the team, by his own admission. He quit on the team. And then, wasn't sure if he was going to keep playing football or not, right? This guy who came up from the JUCO ranks and, was just very frustrated at how his career had gone. And, Coach Morris got in touch with him and it's like, hey, I still believe in you. I think you can make a difference here for us in Denton. And yeah, that's certainly been the case. I mean, for my money, I think DT Sheffield is the most explosive player on the offensive side of the ball in this conference. He's got 721 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns on the year. And this is just a guy, he can score from anywhere on the field, anytime. Just very game-changing speed. His acceleration is crazy. He's a really good route runner, good hands. I think the only knock on him is he's a little bit on the smaller side. If he was a little bit taller, I think there's a guy that would have, all kinds of NFL eyeballs all over him. But, at 5'10", just a little bit smaller than you would like, right? But he's going to be a tough assignment for the Roadrunners. Just a guy that every single snap, you got to ID him and, make sure that you've got some extra coverage on his side of the field. Because once the ball's in his hands, right, that's where he really does his damage. He can run the fly route. He can get open downfield, but most of the plays I've seen from him that have impressed me the most were like, him catching the out route and turning up on the sideline, right? Or him running the drag route and just outrunning the linebackers in zone coverage and, getting some open space there. So just a real speed demon of a player. He's very tough. He's definitely the player to watch, from this whole offense. I think even more so than Chandler Morris, which might be a hot take. I don't know, but DT Sheffield is just a very special player in my eyes. They have some other receivers that are really good as well. Obviously in an air raid, you really got to have, pretty good stable of guys that you can throw out there and feel comfortable with. Damon Ward Jr. is a receiver that's been at UNT for a while. He stepped into a bigger role this year and is really, really thriving in it. 18 yards per catch was really impressive. 4 touchdowns from him. Blair Conright's got 4 touchdowns as well. And, a guy that statistically doesn't put out as much production as some of these other guys, but I really liked what I've seen from Landon Sides, who's like their slot receiver. Just a really nifty kind of receiver, right? He's got really great hands. He runs with underneath routes really well. Kind of bit of that safety blanket, for Chandler Morris of, my first 2 options aren't there. I'm going to look to Landon and make sure he can get positive yardage on this play. So one of those guys that I think might, if you spend too much time focusing on Sheffield and Ward and you leave Sides too wide open or, give him too much space for the check down, can make you pay for it, right? But that's just kind of the trade-off you have to live with when the offense has, some really excellent receivers that you got to worry about as well. They have a tight end, Oscar Hammond, who's very involved in the passing game as well. He's been a solid player for them. Only 1 touchdown this year, but definitely a guy you have to account for and one that they're going to look to force the ball to as well. So like I mentioned, the rushing game isn't a huge focus for the Mean Green. It's definitely secondary for sure. Shane Porter is their leading receiver. He's got 340 yards on the season and, a really nice 6.3 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns. But, just to show how little they're using their running backs is, Porter only has like 38 yards per game, right? So they're really not giving him the ball much. You would expect with a guy averaging for that many yards per carry that, they'd have him in the mix and, try to take advantage of that. The potential 6 yards per play is really elite. But, schematically, that's just not what they're looking to do, right? They're not looking to impose their will. They're looking to get the ball to Sheffield and these receivers and go make big plays that way and score really quickly. I don't have the numbers of the stats in front of me, but I heard Coach Traylor say in one of his media interviews this week that North Texas was leading the country in all kinds of categories about, scoring on the first couple plays of a drive, scoring drives under 1 minute long, all this kind of stuff. So they're a bit of a boomer bust, right? Like they're going to try to hit the big plays downfield. They're not afraid of that. And, that slow, methodical style of offense is just not really something that they take a big focus on, right? They're going to try to make big plays, kind of video game offense, right? And it's worked pretty well for them, so far this year. I think Army got the best of them for sure, but, it's a really, really salty defense over there, really great team. And, just the fact that Army had the ball for so long. Texas only had like 6 possessions on offense or something like that. So wouldn't put too much stock into that for sure. But this offense is really nice. They have been hit pretty hard with injuries, on the offensive line and the running back room. So they have a freshman, Mackenzie McGill. That's gotten a lot of run for them. He's got 6 touchdowns this year. But, similar to Shane Porter, they just don't really use him a whole lot. He's only rushing for an average of 25 yards per game. So, the usage there is pretty interesting. And I assume that imbalance of run to pass will hold up against UTSA as well, since UTSA does have a very, very, very strong run defense and not a very great passing defense. So I think you're going to see both teams, continue to play that same style that they've had this year where, it's kind of passing first and running secondary. So like I mentioned, they've had some pretty bad injury problems on that offensive line, which has caused them to look really, really young. They've got 3 underclassmen starters. They got a freshman starting at offensive tackle who's going to have his work cut out for him, blocking Jamori Robinson for sure. So I think the defensive front's going to have a lot of opportunities to make Chandler Morris uncomfortable, right? To cause him to roll out, to cause him to step out in the pocket. And, that's not as much of a guaranteed success against him as it would be for most quarterbacks at the collegiate level. Just because, Chandler Morris is he's a real vet, right? He's cool under pressure. And like I said earlier, he's accurate on the run, right? So even if you get him out of the pocket, the odds of him delivering, an on-target pass are much higher than for most quarterbacks at this level. So, obviously you're going to take that all day versus him sitting back comfortably in the pocket. But, even if UTSA is able to get a lot of pressure on Morris, it may not directly translate to, a complete collapse of the UNT offense like how it would against a lot of opponents that you're going to play. So, I think the key for the defense, right, is to get Morris out of the pocket where that he's accurate, but he does make some questionable decisions when he's outside the pocket sometimes. Sometimes I think he gets a little bit too aggressive to try to create a big play when the play breaks down like that, and it kind of goes off schedule. So, UTSA's got to find a way to keep their turnover streak going, keep the sack streak going. And I think they're going to have plenty of opportunities to do that this week against Chandler Morris in this UNT offense. And, if they, Ken Robinson's not coming back this season, but if they could get Denver Harris back, if they could get Zay Frazier back, that would make a really big difference. I saw on the depth chart, they moved Jamarius Lewis over to free safety, so he would get the start next to Elliot Davison, which I think is a good move. We saw Jamarius Lewis get that big interception against Memphis, and he was a really good player at New Mexico. He was the starter there before that coaching staff turned over. So, it's a guy that I thought would be in the mix pretty heavily for the Roadrunners this year, and it's just taken a bit longer than expected, I think, for him to really establish himself. And, of course, injuries might be a huge factor in that as well. But if they can get some nice performance out of Jamarius Lewis, get 1 or 2 of those cornerbacks back, they're going to be in a much better position than they would have been 2 weeks ago. So we'll see how things turn out on the injury front there as we head into Friday. To jump over to the defensive side of ball for the Mean Green, I think this is a unit that's still kind of figuring itself out a little bit. Last year, their defense was maybe the worst in the country. I mean, they were definitely bottom 5, which had to have been very frustrating for UNT fans because their defensive coordinator was the highest paid coordinator in the group of 5. They got the cornerbacks coach from Iowa State to come down to Denton, and the results have not been up to par for sure. So they've been trying a lot of different things to try to get that defense fixed. So I can't remember the name of their defensive coordinator, but when he came into Denton, he brought a 3-3-5 defense in with him, which is pretty unorthodox these days. That defense was popular a while ago, like I would say like a generation of college players ago. And it's kind of fallen out of favor, right? You see teams nowadays run the 3-4 defense much more frequently where you've got that extra guy directly on the line of scrimmage. That's a defense that UTSA's run, and I would say most schools are running a 3-4 these days, and if they're not running a 3-4, they're usually running a 4-2-5, right? So UNT's 3-3-5 defense just did not work for them. They just, I think primarily just didn't have the size to really run that defense. They were lighter at the defensive end position, so they had a hard time, holding up the line of scrimmage there because you got to keep the linebackers clean. You don't have that edge help. 3-3-5, the linebackers are directly stacked behind the defensive linemen. So, being able to hold that line of scrimmage is really important and to not get pushed back and, kind of cause the rushing lanes to get tied up and prevent the linebackers coming downfield. And that's exactly what we saw from UNT. So after sticking with the 3-3-5 all of last season and into like the first quarter of this season, I think it was the Wyoming game, they came out and they moved to a 3-4 defense and had pretty immediate results. Looked a lot better, just better personnel fit for them. They really needed to scrap that roster on the defensive side to, rebuild to run that 3-3-5 defense. So, credit to them for changing that defense and causing some improvement there because they've definitely improved since moving to the 3-4. But one thing that's really interesting, though, is they ran a different defense against Army. So they tossed out the 3-4 against Army and went to a 4-3 defense, even more old school than the 3-3-5. And, I think that defense looked pretty good against Army, sort of. I don't know. It's tough to say because Army was not trying to make big explosive plays. They were very intentionally trying to be as methodical as possible to prevent the number of possessions that Chandler Morris and the UNT offense got. And obviously they were extremely successful in that strategy. So it was a lot of 2-yard, 3-yard gains for the Army offense. So much quarterback dive, so much fullback dive, so much, right? And, on paper, UNT's defense looked good because they were not letting those plays go for a lot of yards. But when you're playing against an offense that's not afraid to go for it on fourth down, not afraid to run the ball on third and medium like Army is that really a success? Maybe not. But, not a whole lot of missed assignments from them. I thought they were very well prepared for Army. Just a tough assignment against a really good football team there. So I imagine we'll see UNT go back to a 3-4 this week against a more traditional spread offense that UTSA has. But just kind of wanted to give that context. I do find it quite interesting for sure. Now, while UNT's defense has definitely improved compared to last year, I would say they're still poor overall. They're ranked 118th in the country in net EPA per play, which is one of the advanced metrics I use that kind of combines like play-by-play successes versus big explosive plays as well. And they obviously are not very favorable to be 118 in the country. And big reason why is they give up a lot of like short but successful rushing plays against defenses. They just have a hard time really shutting down the run, even when they are playing good assignment football. I think the size there is a concern. Just lack of guys that can blow up a play, right? But outside of that, I think the biggest issue they have is their secondary is just really, really, really young. And they've got a lot of guys that I really like a lot on that secondary, but they're still learning how to play the game at this level, right? So you see a lot of miscommunications from them, a lot of guys getting left wide open. Two of those guys are guys that UTSA was totally in the mix for recruiting-wise. Cornerback Taylor Starling was a guy that I think picked UNT over UTSA on signing day, and Javen Anderson was a rare North Shore player that UTSA was not able to land. That one still hurts, and to see those guys, on the two deep and starting so young at UNT definitely stings even more so. Now that UTSA's got a walk on the two deep at safety this week, right? Those guys really could have made a difference at UTSA this year. So to see those guys over at North Texas playing a lot early just adds a little bit of extra fuel to the rivalry fire for sure. So while it's great that those guys are getting some mix, right? They've definitely taken some licks as well. Both guys don't have very good grades on PFF. still, just learning the intricacies of that defense. Absolutely, right? And the other cornerback, Rich Tejada, that's a guy that UTS fans are probably pretty familiar with. And I always remember JT Clark going up and getting that fade route in the end zone against Tejada, who was like 5'8", and JT was 6'3", and just a great image of JT just towering over Ridge to go get that touchdown and come down with it. Just a really beautiful image and a great memory of the fun times that we had here in the trailer era at UTSA. But Ridge has taken a bit of a step back this year. He's given up a couple of touchdowns, 4 touchdowns to be exact, this year in coverage, and just not playing as well as he's had in the past. So that pass defense has been quite shaky for North Texas. The way that UTSA's passing game is playing right now, definitely going to have some opportunities there, especially if the receiver is a little bit healthier this year. We see Owen McCowan taking those steps forward all the time. So it's a matchup you get alike if you're UTSA. Can have some opportunities, to hopefully create some big plays against a really young secondary that's still figuring things out, so to speak. Now, while I mentioned Taylor Starling and Javen Anderson and Rich Tejada, some of the guys that are struggling on the defense, they do have some really good safeties as well. Evan Jackson and Jaden Hill both have had very strong seasons for the Mean Green, played very well. So it's not like they're completely clueless out there. They do have some good players. It's just when those young guys are on the field, at the same time, leads to a lot of situations where there's just some mishaps in the coverage and, who's picking a wide receiver and, reading routes and all that kind of stuff. So now up front, I think the linebacking group for North Texas is pretty good. Jalen Smith, Jordan Brown, Ethan Weslowski, all good players for the Mean Green. They've got some really solid players there. Defensive line, I think, is a little bit questionable for me. Their nose tackle, Roderick Brown, is a really good player. It's a guy who's made some pretty big plays against UTSA in the past. Just a very active player, very quick off the line of scrimmage at that nose tackle position. A guy that can be disruptive. They have Fatafia Veilea. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but that's also a guy who's made some big plays on the defensive interior for the Mean Green against UTSA. So another one to look out for. But it's really that linebacker group that I think is kind of the highlight for UNT. And, I think if they had a better defensive line, those linebackers would really shine. But they're able to do some pretty good stuff even without, having a lot of penetration up front and, some space eaters that can really keep the blockers off the second level. When I was talking to JD, who covers UNT, I was joking with him about how poor UTSA's run game has been. He was like, yeah, but North Texas has had an opposing running back have a career day pretty much every game this season. So he's like, if one of your guys gets hot, it could be a big day for them. So we'll see. There have been years in the past where UTSA's running offense was struggling, and they played UNT and just kind of put it all together and had some really big plays in the run game. So we'll see if UTSA can repeat that this week. I'm still pretty bearish on that run game for sure, especially with that offensive line being as hobbled as they are. But maybe coming out of the bye week, they'll have some fresher legs, and I know Brandon High's been recovering from injury as well, so if he's healthy, that'll be huge. I don't know if it means anything, but this week was the first week they moved Kavorian Barnes down the depth chart. He was listed as running back 1 all season long, and coming out of the bye week, we now see Robert Henry listed as a starting running back, which, he pretty much has been the starting running back all season, so I don't know if that's just a ceremonial thing, but I did find that a little bit interesting, I guess. We'll just see what that carry distribution looks like, and we'll see if those guys can have more success against this Mean Green front than they've had against most teams that they played this season. Because I for one would sure love to see UTSA get back to being a little bit more balanced on offense and really holding up that triangle of toughness of running the football. Right. Definitely have enjoyed watching Owen throw the ball around the yard for sure. Don't get me wrong, but it's just much more sustainable to have a steady run game to be able to lean upon, especially down the stretch and when you're trying to protect a lead, right? So great matchup for both teams this week. I mean, I think you see some really interesting matchups, some compelling storylines. Both teams have been hit hard by injuries at different positions, and sometimes the same one with the offensive line. So all things considered, I mean, I think it's gonna be a really good game this week. You get the ESPN2 spotlight, a lot of eyeballs on this rivalry. Maybe for the first time since that 2022 conference championship game, but that game was at Conference USA and it was relegated to CBS Sports. So I mean, what you got, like 100,000 people watching it or something like that? You probably got well over 500,000, maybe 1 million even, watching a Friday night game between these two schools. So if it's as competitive and explosive on offense, I think it'll probably will be. I think it'll be a good TV crowd. I don't know if the crowd in the stadium will be as impressive, but I, for one, will be there. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's a great game. As far as prediction goes, I just think UNT got a really tough draw here, right? To have those three really tough opponents in 3 consecutive weeks, and then you have the short week coming off Army, which is the most physical and difficult to play out of that whole group. It's just tough, man. I would just wonder how UNT is going to show up, physically, just after what was a bludgeoning that they took against Army. So while there's a lot that gives me concern here for UTSA, my gut feels pretty good about it. I mean, I think this team is putting it together. I think they're a different beast at home, and not just this season, but always under Jeff Traylor. And then they just don't lose at home unless they're playing Army, and they're not playing Army. So give me the Roadrunners to take this one. My gut tells me they're going to win comfortably, but my mind tells me otherwise. And I'm going to listen to my mind. I'm going to say UNT 31, UTSA 34, and a game that's going to be a lot of fun and have the internet buzzing as they tune in to watch these two schools that don't have a lot of love between the two of them. So, yeah, really excited and challenging doing a solo preview, but got through it. So before I sign off and leave you guys, I do want to say thank you to some new patrons that we picked up this week. David and Matt both joined us at the Insider tier, and as joining us on Patreon, they get access to a new blog post that I wrote this week. I obtained a copy of UTSA's new Nike contract with their apparel provider Game One, and there was a lot of interesting stuff in there. And I don't want to give it all away. Obviously, I hope you guys will all go sign up for Patreon and read the details, and get to read the contract as well. But definitely some interesting stuff that I think shows us a little bit, or maybe like helps us imply a little bit about some strategic decisions for UTSA. And it's interesting to compare those apparel contracts from school to school because they're so different. I mean, I probably read like 7 or 8 different apparel contracts while I was preparing that blog post, and none of them were alike. So it's really interesting stuff. And I know our listeners and our viewers and all that tend to be a little bit more interested in the business side of sports. So hope you guys enjoyed that post. I had fun researching and writing it for sure. It's like a once in a decade thing for the program you cover to get a new apparel contract. So it was nice to dive into that a little bit. And I'm excited for some new looks for the Roadrunners, right? I'm tired of the little shoulder designs thing. I want those to go away. Never been a fan of those, whether it was like the Roadrunner beak or the feathers or whatever. Yeah, so change is good. It's a much better contract for UTSA. It's cool to see the growth of the athletics program reflected in something tangible like a apparel contract. So good stuff. And lastly, of course, I want to say thank you to our Board of Trustees members and our big money donors. The Board of Trustees levels that includes Digiteek, John Otwell, Gary and Ruben represent the UTSA Burger Tailgate, Ray Redding and Meet Me Apparel, Brandon Grill and the Grill Realty Group, Andy Elizada, Proficient Benefit Solutions, Ian McClendon and Seeker LLC, Javon Townsend, President of the DFW chapter of the UTSA Alumni Association, Ryan Squares, Waterman Construction, UTSA Annual Giving, Artisan Vapor and CBD, Wayne Gonzalez and the Runners Rising Project. And for our big money donors, a big thank you, as always, to Ben Tovar, the Bunch family, Zach Espericueta on the San Antonio Podcast Network, Alejandro Benavides, Dan Nerdahl, host of Around the Birdbath, Jack Vasos, board president for the UTSA Alumni Association, John Nally, Rick Cortez of Rowdy Road Grillers, Sumner McDaniel, UTSA King Bowser, Maddie, and Home Field Apparel, where you can use the discount code UTSA1Homefield to get 15% off of your first order as you do your holiday shopping for your friends, families, and loved ones. So thank you guys all so much. I'm out of breath. I'm about to go smash 30 ounces of ice water to replenish myself from the solo preview podcast. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you learned a little bit about this rivalry, about North Texas's 2024 roster. And I'll see you guys at the Dome on Friday.